Thank you. Very interesting panel. I wanted to ask a quick question to Andrew, to go back to Andy, to go back to monetary policy. I really like your reference to the principal agent problem, in particular for central banks. What I don't see is your emphasis on a single instrument. It's clear that there should be, independence should only be related to instruments, but why only one? And to go, to refer to your examples, this would be like, the surgeon being only allowed to use one scalpel, and maybe there's a new type of scalpel which is maybe consumes a lot more of electricity, but is extremely effective for the achievement of the surgeon's goals. And where is it in that theory? I want to stay to theory to be clear. Where is it written that is not allowed to use the new scalpel?
Thank you very much. If you allow me, as time flies, we can maybe collect a few questions and then have a round of answers. So, Mr. Häusler, yeah, and then...
Well, if I may, just a question to Charles. Looking at that...
Would you mind taking the microphone for the recording?
Charles,
Thank you.
These are not even recent US numbers. If you put some numbers around June 27th, Europe, you would have not 0.98, you would have the case of some German banks, 0.3, 0.25. So that has changed ever since. But at the time, what do you make of that? Should they have gone under, or what would you answer? Shall I pass on the mic?
Yes, please do so.
Yes, Mr. Levin, thank you very much for giving us some enlightenment on the role of Congress for the congressional oversight. I would be very interested to know how it operationally works, because monetary policy is very complicated, and not all members of parliamentary bodies are extremely competent in that field. I ask you that question because here in Europe, with the Euro system, we lack some oversight. ECB and the president always says we stick to our mandate, we simply fulfill our mandate, and the president never recognizes any accountability, even not in front of the German constitutional courts or any other parliament. I would be very interested to know how the congressional oversight in reality works.
Thank you very much. And if you allow me, I will add one question to Jill and go back to the beginning of your talk when you pointed out that the pressure, the danger that we're trying to prevent, to protect central banks against comes, one, from the political side and two, from the industry side. And I was wondering whether you think that we can use the same instruments to protect against those two kinds of pressures. Don't we need two different sets of instruments? And I would think that those that we have in law, at least in European German law, focus on the political influence and not the industry pressure. So that would be my question to you. Shall we do ladies first and in the round of answers? Please.
So thanks. So, I mean, I actually thought, Charles, your example was so interesting because I think it's at the core of what the New Deal settlement was worried about. I mean, what you highlight is, look, from an MBA's perspective, and MBAs aren't necessarily super expert, right? They all know that book value is not the way you measure firm value or assess economic risk. And in fact, I would say when I teach corporate finance to law students who are even less expert on this than MBA students, right? They get that. Yes, this book value is a completely artificial concept. And I think it responds a little bit to your question. This is, to a certain extent, this is serving the interests of industry. But I'm very taken by Andy's observation that from a legal perspective, this is something where, you're not, even if independence in theory was a solution, and I don't think it's a full solution to the agency problem, but it is in part a solution to some of the political and industry, right? But if it's not possible, right, and we're not going to amend our Constitution, even to the degree that the German Constitution preserves central bank independence, right? That's just not on the table. So how do we go about that? Because I think about Andy's idea, okay, at least some of this is supposed to be supervised and could be supervised more rigorously by Congress. But yeah, I've testified before Congress. The idea that you could even persuade people, this is book value, and you should be thinking about this differently, right? The idea of the New Deal is no, Congress, even in the 30s and 40s, couldn't exercise this oversight function particularly effectively. So where do we go? I didn't answer the question, I just asked.
That's fine, that's a way to answer. Andrew, please.
Well, maybe I'll give it to Charlie first.
Oh, well, yes, thanks. So let me start with yours, but I also want to get in my discussion of these other questions that have been raised. So I'm going to talk at the next session or two from now about a particular idea. So there's a long list of ideas that financial economists who are part of public policy have come up with for how we can fix it. I got very close. I'll describe the idea later. It's a particular kind of contingent capital requirement on banks that's triggered by economic value that's measurable, okay? I got very close on it. I had the Wall Street, the story is, I went to Jeb Hensarling when he was chair of the House Financial Services Committee. He's an economist, by the way, so I met with him privately for about an hour and convinced him it was a good idea. But he said, before I incorporate this requirement into the bill I'm proposing, I want you to get the Wall Street Journal editorial board to agree and to promote it. So I went to the Wall Street editorial board, gave them a 1-hour presentation. They issued an editorial advocating my proposal. Then his staffer called me and said, we think it's a great idea, but we don't think we're ready for it yet. So I just want to point out that was a Republican member of Congress, very smart. He agreed with it substantively, but didn't do it. What you need is a democratic society upheaval of anger. And the problem is they never last very long, right? 2008, 2009, and then we're done. So I don't have an answer for our democracy other than we need better citizens, right? And I don't think there's another way. Okay, now on oversight, Alan Meltzer had this so good. He would say, when he would testify before Congress, he'd say, Senators, it's not your fault. He said, you have a limited number of hours. You sit there, you've got all these amorphous objectives. The chairman of the Fed comes, and he can run out the clock, talking about how he balances this and here's that, and he's sensitive to everyone, and you can't hold him accountable. You know what the secret is? You have to give him a clear objective and a prioritization of objectives. For example, you could say, I want you to balance your objectives through something like a Taylor rule, and I want you to be explicit about what it is. You can change it, but I want you to always announce it in advance. We almost had that as legislation in the US, that the Fed had to announce what its rule was. It could vary it, but then when Meltzer said, when you're questioning them, you can say, that's your rule. How come you didn't do it? But unless you have that, all the questioning in the world isn't going to make a difference. Finally, on the market to book value, Citibank, through most of the period prior to 2007, was close to your 0.3. Prior to 2017, between 2008 and 2017. Yes, that means that the market is anticipating huge value destruction, and those intermediaries should be shut down. And they're also creating huge risk of another government bailout.
Well, so let's see, there were two questions. So my father was an orthopedic surgeon, so I've thought a lot about medicine over the years, and I think that we have a lot to learn from the medical field, and probably medical legal scholars and there's a big medical business right? And that would just be part of broadening the conversation, okay? Because it's not so different. One, when my father was trained as a medical doctor, the doctor was like a priest, and you never asked any question, just do this, call me in the morning. And what happened was there started to be a lot of lawsuits, malpractice suits, and by the 80s and 90s, and now it's completely standard in medical schools, okay, basic practice, how do you communicate to the patient and the patient's family? Okay, and I think central banks need to do a lot more of that. They're very good at communicating to a narrow audience. In the United States, we call them Fed watchers. And most Americans really do not understand anything about what the Fed's doing. And that's a problem. If you want public legitimacy and accountability, you got to communicate to the patient. Okay, another thing is the doctor absolutely is under constraints. And some of that has to be decided before the surgery. If we find a tumor, do you want us to take it out? Okay, do you want us to go in deeper? Okay, do you want us to look for other right? And some of that conversation has to happen. In other cases, the surgeon has to come out during the surgery to say, I'm really sorry, here's what we're looking at. In other cases, and if it's really an emergency, you just gotta do it. And hopefully there's enough trust between the patient, the patient's family, and the physician. They're going to do the best they can. And I think the reality in central banking is there are cases that are emergencies where decisions have to be made in the middle of the night, and it doesn't always work according to plan. Okay, but that's medical practice, and we have a lot to learn from that for central banking, because the patient's family, let's say, is the legislature, the parliament, or the Congress, and the patient is all the ordinary families and businesses that are being affected, okay, and they're part of the conversation. That's what we mean by accountability. Now, there's another thing about the chief surgeon. The chief surgeon says, we're building a whole new surgery lab, and it's going to cost us $50 million. Now, the hospital director says, oh, really? And how are you going to pay for that? And I think that conversation has to happen too. What is going on here with Chair Powell? Let me just talk about it for a minute here. It became public information last spring that the Federal Reserve is completing a headquarters upgrade that will cost $3 billion for 3,000 employees. Now work it out, that's $1 million per employee for the headquarters. It's mind-boggling. Some media called it the Versailles Palace on the Mall. And even it's actually more expensive than Versailles Palace when you work it out per square foot. Okay, Congress asked Jay Powell questions about it in a congressional hearing in June before the Senate Banking Committee. And he gave blatantly false answers. A member of Congress sent a request to the DOJ to do a criminal investigation for perjury, and which they are now proceeding with. Okay, the head of the Senate Banking Committee, I think a week ago or 10 days ago, said, look, Jay Powell's not a criminal. There's no criminal investigation necessary here. Okay, it wasn't perjury in the sense that there was no corruption. Okay, the way the head of the Senate Banking Committee said this was gross incompetence. But gross incompetence in this case is not criminal. Okay, the reason I say this is important is because this is what congressional oversight is needed for, and it's good that this came out in a hearing. This should have never gone to the Department of Justice. Congress should have been on top of it. Now, last question, which I think comes back to here. Congress is totally incapable, utterly incapable of monitoring the Fed's monetary policy. Of course it is. It's also incapable of monitoring NASA on space exploration. It's utterly incapable of deciding which battleships and aircraft carriers, and we could go down a list here. So Congress, since the 1970s, has a government accountability office with a lot of experts. They write reports about NASA. They write reports about the use of AI in facial recognition. Okay, they write reports about which types of aircraft should be funded, or droids or whatever in the military. Okay, and every agency has an inspector general who's independent, appointed by the President of the United States, confirmed by the Senate, and accountable directly to Congress. Every single major agency, with only one exception, which is the Federal Reserve Board. The Fed has a IG, who's the employee of the Fed, who reports to the Fed chair. Every major agency has a comprehensive performance reviews by GAO, except one, which is the Federal Reserve. And so if we agree under the Constitution that the Federal Reserve is a creature of Congress, that's accountable to Congress, that we don't want the president getting involved, we don't want the DOJ getting involved, all the buildings, that stuff all should have been reviewed by GAO and by an independent IG who would be reporting to Congress. So then Congress can have a hearing and ask questions or not. They're elected officials, that's up to them. But I think you cannot expect congressional staffers or members of Congress to figure all this out. They need help. That's what the IG is for, that's what GAO is for.
Thank you very much for your answers, for inspiring and interesting and precise and thought-provoking presentations. I would love to continue the discussion, but we're already over time. So I leave it at that. Thanks again. I know you're all going to be with us for coffee and for the rest of the conference, so you can raise your questions over coffee. And so that's what I will do. Thank you very much, and enjoy your coffee break.